Respect it. Respect it. Think about those first responders out there, what they're having to go through, law enforcement, DOT, and everyone else. Just give them space. Let them do what they do. I got a buddy that was going all the way from Wapaton to the Jamestown area with the gear that he needed to help out with the North Dakota Highway Department. Give them room. There's my ask of the day. Let's get to the phone lines, and we'll get to Rick. Rick, what do you have for me?
Morning, Joel. I just have so many memories. The one memory was I was at Chris Ann helping a buddy of mine fight the flood out there. All night duty out manning the pumps. Eddie Schultz on the radio all night long. I remember this was the eerie thing. We had a pellet gun. The rats were swimming in the floodwater trying to come up the dike. It was just like World War One, trench warfare. We'd be popping off these rats as they were trying to get over the dike.
Yeah.
It was something.
It
was.
I have to tell you, I was listening to the same thing. The job that the whole team here did, the news team at KFGO, and the on-air personalities that were sleeping on floors and getting as much information out. When Danny Wallaker had to get word out, he just walked in here. He just walked into the studio and said, all right, I need to get on air. And so I know you're right, Rick. My sister lost her home in Grand Forks. I and my best friend drove up to Grand Forks to get her kids, and she was on the front line throwing sandbags, and I was like, Tommy, you guys are going to lose. We had to go through Castleton to get here, and I don't think she really realized that they were going to lose in Grand Forks, Rick. And it's go ahead.
Do you remember, Joel? We had so many friends up there, and after it seemed like we had maybe one here, we called our friends up there, and you'd say, man, aren't you guys worried? And they said, no, if our house floods, the whole town would flood.
Yep.
That's what they said, and of course, that's what happened.
That's exactly what happened. Thank you, Rick. Tommy's boys, Evan and Luke, that came home with me, they never went back to Grand Forks until the fall school term. They went to school down in my neck of the woods. They went to school there. It was life-changing for so many people. And it's 25 years. It's just amazing to me that it's been 25 years already. Ken Conrad will come on right after this. 100-880-5346. We're taking your thoughts, your memories of the 97 flood. 25 years have passed since that terrible event that happened here in the Red River Valley. Senator Kent Conrad was one of the leaders in the state of North Dakota at that time, and one of the people that everybody counted on for the type of information and conduit to the help that we desperately needed. And he joins us right now. Senator Conrad, good to have you back on News and Views.
Always good to be with you, Joel.
Well, I want to just talk a little bit about what that was like to be serving in the Senate at a time like that, because with all the different jobs that you had to do and issues you had to face, this isn't one that you could be ready for, Senator.
This wasn't on anybody's planner, but it took over our lives. The next several years, I think every morning I woke up thinking of the to-do list for what we were going to do to help Grand Forks and Fargo and all the towns in between recover. And not just the towns in between, but Wahpeton, south of Fargo, was also very affected. I mean, it was an incredible series of disasters. As you know, the worst winter storm in 50 years, followed by the flood and the fire in many of the communities. The fire, of course, in Grand Forks, downtown Grand Forks. It was a stunning disaster.
So everyone was looking for help in making decisions before we lost Grand Forks, when we almost lost Fargo. Of course, we saw the devastation that happened in Breckenridge, Minnesota. And, my wife at the time was working at St. Francis in Breckenridge, and they couldn't get the elderly people out of the nursing home. I mean, they couldn't get them. They took them to the hospital, and they were, I think, on the second floor, where they didn't have the type of water and sewer system you would want to be able to meet the needs. A guy named Cal Michaels, a huge hero down in Breckenridge. You make your way north, the next thing you know, you're sitting there saying to Kent Conrads of the world, what do we do? I mean, that had to be a really hard job when everyone's looking to you and saying, all right, what do we do here? I mean, what do you think we should do?
We became very focused. One of the first things we did, Senator Dorgan, Congressman Pomeroy, and I, was invite Mayor Pat Owens of Grand Forks to Washington to meet with the leadership of Congress and the administration. And I'll never forget, we had a pre-meeting in my office, and we put up a giant tablet on an easel, and we listed all the things that needed to be done and what they would cost, just rough estimates. And John O'Leary, the head of Public Works in Grand Forks, was there. John Schmizik, who was the counsel for Grand Forks, was there. And we made this list, and after about an hour and a half, we had a list of over $570 million of needs just for Grand Forks. And I can tell you, it surprised even us how big the number was, and we knew immediately that we had a tall mountain to climb, because we were going to have to sell a rescue package for North Dakota and Minnesota. And we were going to have to do it in a not very favorable environment. So one of the first things that happened that I remember, Joel, was that Lucy Kaludi, my wife, was at a spouse's luncheon in the Senate, and Hillary Clinton came over to her and said, I understand Mayor Pat Owens is going to be in town today. I wonder if you could bring her down to the White House to meet with me, so I better understand what's happening and what we could do to help. And so later that afternoon, Lucy took Mayor Owens down to the White House, and they sat in Hillary Clinton's office, and Mayor Owens described what had occurred. The worst winter storm in 50 years, knocking down power, and then, of course, the incredible floods that followed, and the devastating fire in downtown Grand Forks. And as Hillary Clinton listened to this story, she jumped up and she said, we've got to go over and tell the president what's happened. So they walked over to the Oval Office, walked in, and President Clinton then listened to the story, and he said, well, we've got to help, and we've got to marshal the resources of the federal government to help Grand Forks and Fargo and all these towns up and down the Red River. And of course, he then personally came to visit Grand Forks. So that was an incredible time. And after that, we met with the leaders of Congress. And I tell you, Mayor Owens charmed a lot of these senior members. You know, she had a way about her, and she charmed them. And, you know, some were more helpful than others. I remember going over to the House of Representatives to meet with Dick Armey, who was the Republican leader in the House, and a native of North Dakota. You know, Dick Armey was from Can-Do, North Dakota. Well, he was anything but can-do with us. He told me to my face that he didn't intend to help us at all. And in fact, he'd do everything he could to block aid, which is kind of breathtaking. I mean, that's how partisan, you know, people complain about partisanship now, and they should, but my God. I mean, he was over the top.
I remember that. I remember people from the state being called to try to talk to him that he might listen to because they were from the same side of the aisle as him. I remember Gene Nicholas and other people saying, "What is with Dick Armey? He's from here. Why won't he help?" And I think you got it done in the end without his help, didn't you?
Oh, yeah, we got it done without his help. You know, Earl Pomeroy, you know, you think about it, we got this incredible disaster package through the Senate. And, you know, Kit Bond was the former Republican governor of Missouri. You'd think he would be helpful to a state in need. He was the chairman of the Key Appropriations Subcommittee, and he fought us every step of the way. But we were fortunate because Senator Dorgan was on the Appropriations Committee. Congressman Pomeroy had a lot of influence in the House. He was on the Key Committee there. And he had many friends. You know, people liked Earl Pomeroy. And I was the top Democrat on the Budget Committee, so we were well positioned. And here's another sort of interesting insight. At one point, I was meeting with Ted Stevens right off the chamber in the U.S. Senate. And Ted Stevens was chairman of the Appropriations Committee in the U.S. Senate, a key player in disaster aid. And he was telling me all the reasons they couldn't do anything, and, you know, they'd be able to do a little something, but it wouldn't be much, and we shouldn't be counting on getting a big package because, you know, the budgets were tight. And I finally blew up on him. I said, you know, you didn't have any of these reservations when you needed aid for Alaska, his home state. I'm just asking you to show the same care to our state. And I kind of stormed off. And his budget, or his Appropriations Committee aide who was with him later ran into me later that day, and he said, you know, Kent, when you blew up and left him, he turned to me and said, you know, we better help him. And he did help us. That was one Republican who really helped us, Senator Ted Stevens of Alaska.
That's so. It's bad it took that, but I'll tell you what, the help was needed. I mean, it was so desperately needed.
Oh, my God.
You were there. You saw the people at the Grand Forks Air Force Base sleeping on floors. I mean, that was devastation.
You know, I think it was my Budget Committee staff later told me that the aid package that we got was the largest per capita, per person, aid package after disaster in history, the most generous. And, you know, you think the unbelievable series of disasters, and I think the evacuation of Grand Forks was the largest mass evacuation of a city in U.S. history since the Civil War. So it's hard to think back on how devastating it was. Virtually every house and every apartment building and every commercial building in Grand Forks was affected.
Yeah.
So the dimensions of that were simply stunning. Everything had to be redone. The sewer and water systems, the flood protection. You'll recall Lincoln Park, 600 homes had to be destroyed and removed so you could build more defensible lines to protect Grand Forks for the future. Fargo, much the same way, not as devastating because They didn't have the fire, but they certainly had the flood. And of course, we didn't lose Fargo. We really lost the flood fight in Grand Forks.
Yeah. I was working rural water then, Senator, and when you moved all the people out to the air base and gave them, shelter and a place to go for a period of time, they needed water. And so I and my good friend that I worked with for a number of years, Steve Hansen, went up to and spent, I think it was a couple of weeks up there working for Grand Forks Trail Water, and we reversed water to the air base. We ran lines on top of the ground through culverts so we could get them over roads, or through roads, I should say. Anyway, we got water to the air base. And when I went home, we were sleeping in the boardroom with sleeping bags in Thompson, North Dakota. And I don't think I've ever felt as sad and as proud as I did of North Dakota ever in my life since then. It's just you went up to the bar in Thompson after a long day. You had a beer and a buffalo burger, and there wasn't an enemy in the room. Everybody was doing what they could do, and I was just so proud to live here.
I tell you, I felt exactly the same way. I look back on that period, and I've never been prouder to represent North Dakota than I was during that period, because people really stood up. And, man, they helped their neighbors. I can remember so many cases where family would have an elderly neighbor who couldn't evacuate, couldn't self-evacuate, and neighbors took care of neighbors. People reached out, and the air base, I'll never forget what a tremendous job the air base did in welcoming people. And there was never a question. When we called the head of the air base and said, hey, we need to bring thousands of people onto the Grand Forks Air Force Base because they can't be in their homes, and there is no place to house these people other than the Grand Forks Air Force Base. There wasn't a moment's hesitation. The base said, we'll welcome them. We'll give them a royal blue Air Force welcome. That's what he said to me. So a lot of people were heroes. And I tell you, the city officials, Mayor Pat Owens, John O'Leary, John Schmiezik, Ken Veen, the city engineer, my God, the work that they put in to try to do their best to help the city recover. And, of course, Hal Gershman, who was head of the city council, man, he was fantastic. Was so fortunate to have somebody, Hal Gershman, tremendous business acumen, a lot of financial knowledge. It was so important to have him be in a position of leadership in Grand Forks because he really understood the dimensions of what had to be accomplished. And, of course, he was a tremendous spokesperson in Washington, helping people understand how things really added up. But, boy, the people of North Dakota, man, that was a proud hour.
Yeah, it really was. You did a fabulous job. I was right there in the heart and soul of it, watching and hanging on to every word. And I'm kind of proud of the industry I work in. Radio was there 24/7 with people and making sure we were a conduit for folks like you that had to talk to them. And so it's 25 years. I mean, Senator, did you ever think in a million years it was going to go by this fast? I mean, 25 years.
No. One other thing we should point out, the Grand Forks Herald and the Fargo Forum did superb jobs. Mm-hmm. The Grand Forks Herald coverage won a national prize for their coverage. Mike Jacobs, who led the coverage for the Grand Forks Herald, I mean, it is an absolutely brilliant job. And we used those stories that ran day after day in the Fargo Forum, the Grand Forks Herald. I did blow-ups of the front pages of the newspapers, and I'd take them every day to the floor of the U.S. Senate, and I'd put those pictures on easels showing people, here's what's happening. Here's the dimensions of the crisis. Here's why we need a very generous aid package for these places to recover. And I will also credit my colleagues. One other person I should call out is Jim Ramstad, who was a congressman from Minnesota, from the Minneapolis area, who was, of course, from Valley City, North Dakota. Jim Ramstad also helped us over on the House side.
You bet.
So there were a lot of people who really helped out.
Senator, thank you. Thank you for the memories. Thanks for the time.
You bet. Always good.
Senator Ken Conrad. Let's get to the weather cave and find Too Tall Tom. a reporter for the Forum, and he's a reporter for the American Core. He's a member. Adam Willis wrote an article that jumped out at me, and it got my attention in regards to North Dakota's aim at drawing Bitcoin miners with promise of world's cleanest crypto is the head of the article. And I've since I read the article, I have run around to probably 10 people, including friends I have in the investment business, and said, okay, somebody describe to me what it is. I mean, I understand North Dakota wants it. I understand that Doug Burgum and James Lehman with his Department of Commerce and others are all in on crypto, that they think that this is going to be the home of it. But what are we going to be the home of? Is it going to be servers that are in turkey warehouses that have air conditioning? Is it just the use of power? But what is it? And in fairness to Adam, I'm not going to ask him, because that wasn't the premise of his article. The premise of his article was that North Dakota is recruiting this industry to the state of North Dakota. And so I want to get him on to talk about that. Adam, good to have you on News and Views.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me, Joel.
Talk to me a little bit about what North Dakota's goal is here in your research that you did for this article.
Sure. And I should say, first of all, thanks for sparing me the process of explaining all of what crypto is, because that's certainly a little out of my depth. But you and me both. I can do my best.
You and me both.
I can do my best to kind of give the basic lay of the land on it, if that's helpful. But I think as far as the state's goal here, in talking with James Lamont at the Department of Commerce, I think I don't want to overstate it. I think that they see crypto investment and crypto mining as one piece in a larger kind of puzzle of, as James Lamont put it, as trying to diversify the state's economy, basically. That we have this economy that's very contingent on commodity markets like oil and agriculture, and they're trying to find ways to bring in other industries to provide jobs for other sectors and other types of investments, basically. In some ways, I think that's part of the bottom line. I think there's also they see sort of potential benefits to the energy industries here as well, and benefits to they talk about some environmental benefits as well. And we can go into that a little bit more too. But at the bottom line, I think it's about diversifying the economy and bringing in different types of industries and sort of more modern industries, if that makes sense.
So what do we offer? I mean, if you're a taxpayer in the state of North Dakota, what skin do you have in this game?
So far, the state hasn't, as far as what I've been told, the state hasn't provided any money to these projects in the way of state funding. There are some tax incentives that the legislature has established that basically allow for tax breaks for certain types of, high performance computing equipment to help attract these data centers. As far as the reasons that these projects are interested in North Dakota, I think that the jury, to me, seems to be out a little bit on that question still as well. There's been a lot of talk about the cold climates here and that being a reason to help attract these big data centers. Basically, the explanation there is that these data centers generate a ton of heat, and there's a cost to trying to cool the system. And so if you're operating in like negative 20 degree weather, you're not having to pay for those huge expenses to keep the system cooler. The caveat I should put on that is one of the researchers I spoke to for the story, a former Stanford professor, was telling me that a lot of the more modern data centers, actually, it's not all that huge an expense for them. It's like a 5% expense or something like that for cooling the system. So I don't know how much of a factor that's going to be in recruiting these things to North Dakota in the future. The other, just to say the one other piece of it that was talked about when I spoke with this massive data center, which you may be familiar with going to the Williston area, is just the electricity prices here and a sort of regular constant electricity supply that they feel like are important to operating these huge server farms, which we'll probably get into this, but which require enormous amounts of electricity to operate.
What about the structures that the data centers are going to go in? Are they going to use, are they talking about using existing structures?
There is a little bit. I don't know how widespread those conversations are, but one of the things I pointed out in my article that is somewhat interesting to me is there's this huge missile silo complex. Some people might be familiar with in the Nakoma area, this Cold War missile silo complex that looks like it's a huge concrete pyramid-shaped bunker. And I know that the Commerce Department sees that as an asset that's kind of a brownfield that is basically sitting empty right now, and that they think could be converted into a data center for mining cryptocurrencies or something along those lines. The facility that's going into Western North Dakota, into the Williston area, they're in the process now of building out a large facility that's basically going to be these like football field length, kind of long trailer houses. They'll be permanent structures, but they're building all of those themselves, and those will be housing these specialized computers.
Are these things, Adam, things that we know are going to happen? That they're in place, that we're not out there trying to sell, or are these things that we're out there bidding on?
I think that's a good question. So I think I would say it goes case by case. So with this huge one out in Williston that's gotten quite a bit of media attention, that one is in the process right now of scaling up. So they're telling me that they're going to be, I believe they said that they would be operating the first phase, which is a sort of a much smaller initial phase, I think in the month of May, or at least that's their plan right now. Now, whether they're actually going to get up to this 700 megawatts that they say they're going to ramp up to, I couldn't make a prediction on whether that'll happen or not. They're certainly saying that they're going to get there, but it's a huge amount of power. There's been, what the Commerce Department told me is that there's been $3 billion of announced investment in crypto projects here, and then they say that they have $3 billion that from the impression that they gave me is that they're basically crossing the T's on another $3 billion of investment. Now, whether all of this comes to pass or not, I think, maybe the jury's out on that a little bit, or time will tell. But the Commerce Department is certainly saying that there's $6 billion of investment that's basically ready to or almost ready to get to work.
See, to me, and Adam Willis is our guest. He's a writer for the Forum and has been covering North Dakota's aim and making sure that the United States and the world knows that we're the place to come to for the cleanest crypto, for lack of a better way of putting it. If you can understand what that means, you go ahead, because I'm having a hard time, Adam. And I'm not blaming you or your writing. I went through it 3 times. I thought you did a fabulous job. But, the whole process. And here's the irony in all of this for me, Adam. One of the things that North Dakota cites as the big benefactor of this proposal is the coal industry, because of the need for the electricity at the data center. And so
right.
you got to have power for the data center. You got to have power to cool the data center. And we've got power right here, and it's generated in by and large from coal. And so you've got crypto, which is the currency of the future, is how others would describe it. And then you've got the power source, the power of the past, many would say. So I'm like, how do these two worlds get together, Adam, is my big question.
I think that's a great question. And I guess the short answer is that at this point, these data centers just require so much power, and a lot of them need electricity kind of around the clock. So when we talk about renewable resources like wind and solar, they only work when the sun's shining and the wind is blowing. That's kind of the line about renewables. So in many cases, these data centers need to rely on constant sources of power, which basically, encourages some of these fossil fuel producers like coal plants or natural gas power plants to help keep them online or keep them running. There's certainly a lot of talk, and this gets a little bit out of my area, but there's certainly a lot of talk in the cryptocurrency world about finding cleaner ways to mine cryptocurrency. But at this point in time, they use a lot of electricity, and my understanding is that often that's driving higher greenhouse gas emissions.
What does the word mine mean? I know what mining coal is.
Sure.
I know what I mean when they say they're mining cryptocurrency. What does that mean, Adam?
So the word may be a little bit of a misnomer, but basically I think on just the surface level, what's happening here is you have these server farms or data centers that are specialized to solve essentially these increasingly challenging math puzzles or math problems. And when they use a lot of processing power to do that, and when they're able to solve the problem, they're rewarded with, for instance, a Bitcoin or another type of cryptocurrency. And they're basically competing with one another. You have these different kind of server farms in different places that are competing with one another to solve these problems and unlock more cryptocurrency. So as the problems get harder, you're drawing more and more energy in order to I guess unlock or create a Bitcoin. The word mining might be somewhat confusing there, but that's essentially the process that's taking place.
Actually, I get it now. I mean, I just don't understand the different layers of currency. I mean, I can tell you what a quarter is. I can tell you what a 50-cent piece is, and I can tell you what a buck is. I just might be so old that I don't get this. I really am trying to. Now, one of the groups that I've been involved with for years, and I'm quite proud of being involved with, is the Broadband Association, the folks here in North Dakota, and what they've done to try to build up the infrastructure that we need in broadband. I mean, the Broadband Association of North Dakota has been there every step of the way, making sure we were ready for whatever technology was going to lead us into the future. What role did they play in all this as a carrier, as a Dakota Carrier Network?
You know, I may not be the right person to answer that question. Could you say it one more time? And
well,
make sure that
what I'm getting at is you're carrying information, right, to these data centers, and that data center has to send information out, which means it has to be high speed, which means it has to be state of the art, which means it has to be through broadband. And I guess that has to be one of the tools, if you're James Lamont or you're Doug Burgum, that you're selling, is how good the Dakota Carrier Network is. And so it's and some of these questions should be aimed at the governor. I'll speak to James Lamont in a little bit, but I have to tell you, Adam, your article has everybody talking around here. And so I really appreciate it. I have no doubt you're going to be asked to do more in these areas, but I also appreciate that even though we're competitors in the media industry, you and your folks saying, you know what, let's go on. Let's have a conversation about it. So I thank you, Adam, for coming on.
Sure. Well, it's good to be here. I appreciate your interest in the story and glad to be able to talk about it.
Yeah, go find it, folks. It's a great piece with a lot of homework done in it. So, all right, let's get to Sarah Heinrich and find out what's going on in our ag news. We got a message from our great people at Keys Radio 660 saying, you know what, in the Williston Basin, there's a whole lot of people driving around without their lights on. And, of course, we all know what's going on with the storm, with the snow, with everything. Put your lights on. I think people just assume that their car's lights go on, and they don't always go on. Put them on. You'll remember to turn them off. And when you pull the key, it'll beep at you, so you'll know to turn them back off. But get them on. Somebody text in, and this number that text in is the same one that text in before supporting Vladimir Putin over the Ukrainian people. So just, when I see this phone number that texts in, I always kind of roll my eyes and say, you know what, you don't get to put a message on air every day, but, I want to be fair and put this one out there. He said, what do you know about crypto other than certain Democrats, including loser Chuck Schumer, is benefiting big time from an unreported fundraiser using cryptocurrency? Well, there's a couple things. I acknowledge the fact I don't know much about crypto. I know a lot about infrastructure, and I realize what infrastructure it's going to take to have a crypto database here. A place to get information and send information out. Now, I would argue that if you're going to call me stupid, I could match up with you any day and twice on Sunday. And just for the record, one more time to that phone number, I have no idea who you are, but I support the Ukrainian people and not Vladimir Putin. So, yeah, I think I'm maybe on the right side of things. actually talking through our fingertips. But, you know, people are getting asked to go all over the place to help out, to get people, to get the roads cleared off. Just keep that in mind. These state highway workers, these county workers, give them some room. Give them some room. There's a lot of snow out there. Turn your headlights on. I got another message here from a county worker out in Williams County. So please give them some room. Turn your headlights on. They keep sending me notes. They wouldn't be sending me notes unless they needed to send me notes. And when you start bringing gear all the way from the southeastern part of the state and take it all the way off to Bismarck to get the snow moved so you can get the roads opened up and get the interstate back flowing, what does that tell you? The last couple snows that we had in North Dakota this spring, if that's what you want to call this, happened in that southeast corner where I live. And so I was getting all kinds of ribbing from my family members out in the Bismarck-Mandan area about, hey, how'd the snow go? How's it go? You know, all that kind of thing. And so last night when I sent them a little note asking them how their life was going, I had to remind them was that it's Holy Week, that you shouldn't be talking that way to your brother, because the passion came through their fingertips as we text. Somebody texted in and said this, Joel, one benefit of the weather, some of the songbirds must be backed up behind the storm. My North Fargo backyard has some beautiful different birds. Man, that'd be cool. I'm one of those. I'm one of those guys who notices when the hummingbird is there, who notices when the oriole comes. I mean, I like that. That's part of what I enjoy about living here. I always wonder about the robins. If one of the robins said, hey, let's take off, let's go there, and the other one's looking at him now saying, you're an idiot. That's exactly what you are. Jim, you're on News and Views. Go ahead, Jim.
Hey, my thing, this is what I understand about cryptocurrency, and I've got plenty of buddies in the electrical engineering field, and they tried to explain it to me, and I guess this is what it comes down to, is that we use a ton of energy, electricity, or wherever that electricity is generated, to solve these complex mathematical formulas, which I used to think was, well, maybe there's that being used for something in industry and business, not used for anything whatsoever. It's basically just data that just ends up poof, and it goes into thin air, and then you're left with a little Bitcoin, which is worth so much money. And the thing is the amount of pollution that's created to produce these Bitcoins, and it's not really producing anything except contributing to what I feel is more adverse weather due to what we're affecting how we're changing our environment by adding more heat and gases and everything else to the atmosphere. So I'm not for crypto at all. I think crypto is a big scam. I don't know why we should be using our energy resources for doing things like that when there's more important things that we could be doing with them. I don't know. Do you agree with me on that or what?
Here's what I struggle with crypto, and it's probably something so simple that everybody's going to go duh, which is, Jim, how do I, if it's a currency, right? If it's of a value, and I want to buy your pickup today, I mean, there has to be a means of me giving you crypto, right? So it's electronic. So I take these Bitcoins and I transfer X amount to you. And then you're taking the risk that Bitcoin is going to be worth X amount the next day. Fair to say?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. It's not necessarily what the pickup's going to be worth, the next day, as much as whether or not that Bitcoin. And somebody I talked to yesterday said, Joel, a large part of this you got to keep in mind is that the monetary system in the U.S. used to be backed by gold, and it's not anymore. And he said people realize that. And then he went on, and this wasn't a big advocate of crypto, but he wasn't negative on crypto either. He was just trying to explain it to me. And one of the things that he showed me was, working in the field of, bucks and how this works, how on the national markets, cryptocurrency is constantly scrolling. I mean, people are monitoring exactly its value, its worth. And if they're doing that on the CNBCs of the world, wouldn't you say it's made it?
I guess there's people who believe that it's made it. They think this is something that's going to last. But the thing is that my question is, should it last? Should we be using our natural resources to create an electronic coin, which is nothing more than I flip the switch and it's gone, Let's like you turn off a light unless there's some way to store it permanently. It's not like gold where you actually have to dig gold out of the ground to get something out of it. That's tangible and it's not going to go away. This thing, I think it's a bad idea. I really do. And I don't think our resources should be going to do it because it doesn't produce anything.
Well, Howard Buffett does not invest in crypto. And remember when Howard Buffett said that he was going to put a bunch of money into railroads and we all laughed at him and said that's the transportation of the past? How'd that work out for him? Thank you, Jim. Appreciate it. I don't know enough about it to be able to tell you whether or not, and answer Jim's question of whether or not it's good or bad. I have the same reservations as Jim. I do. I have the same, okay, if this is the new and the latest and the coolest way of transferring value and transferring worth, then what's it going to be the next day and the next day and the next day after? Because in this electronic world, there's always someone who can invent a method of value, right? I mean, you can. It's like, okay, I developed this, which anybody can get on the internet, but its value is X and Y, and you won't get it unless you pay me that, even though it's out there in the World Wide Web somewhere. So to be able to sit there and put all the eggs in the basket of crypto, that was a red flag for me. But I want to go back to this. I think that in the article that Adam Willis wrote, there was nothing in there that said that North Dakota is financially getting behind all of this. I think it's trying to help out what is a dying industry, which is the coal industry. I think that what they're trying to do is really point out that, in North Dakota, we're an energy producer, and the more and more the world changes to different energy sources, the less value we have on the energy grid. And so therefore, if we can bring something in like, crypto into North Dakota that sets up its databases here, then boom, we've got another consumer, and we've got a big consumer. We've got people who really want the power. And then there's others who say, well, we shouldn't be tying in and promising that much power because that much power could be needed A, B, and C. Well, like anything, first come, first serve. If I got a place to sell power, I'll sell the power. So I understand it. I get it. There are red flags for me when it comes to Doug Burgum and James Lamont. Don't forget this. James Lamont, who I think came from some little town in Minnesota and now heads up the North Dakota Department of Commerce. James Lamont works for Doug Burgum. Okay, so when I say James Lamont, you got to think of Doug Burgum, right? And so they say that they're trying to diversify North Dakota's economy. Instead of just oil and ag, add something to it, and they claim that crypto is going to be that it's going to be that third leg of the bar stool so that the stool doesn't tip over type of industry for North Dakota. That being said, they're not great at communicating. I mean, they're not very good at explaining what they're going to do. And I'm going to give you some examples, right? Their fingerprints are on the soy crushing plant at Castleton. Now, those fingerprints lead all the way to Japan. They do. Now, that isn't a bad thing. Another market for soy, another place to sell soybeans is a good thing. But that isn't where we're from in the sense of, hey, we're going to put something down right next to you. We're not going to tell you about it because it's ours and you had no right to know. And then you're going to find out that the state of North Dakota knew about this at all the time. And they didn't tell you. And they didn't tell you all in the name of please, 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 we could lose them. They're going to come. And I don't like it when we do business that way. The same thing in Grand Forks. The very same thing in Grand Forks. All of a sudden, boy, China is going to put down a wet corn plant in Grand Forks, right on the edge of town. And we're going to put it right in the middle of what is this area that no one knew they were going to build this in. Now, if you were the city fathers, if you were the individuals that lead, the mayor, the council, the township officers, all of that, you should have let your citizens know what was being proposed. They should have known so they could have a discussion of it prior to the decision to bring it here. Now you're going to say, well, then you risk losing it. So what? First off, if you're making the argument it's all about jobs, we've got enough jobs. We don't have people to fill the jobs. So that argument's done. That's an old argument. If it's all about, well, we've got a place now that's another market for corn, that one I'll listen to. That one I understand. That one I get. But that the corn growers, and the people that are out there that can benefit from this will advocate for it if you have a public discussion on it. You don't need to plop something down in the middle of people's lives and then say, you're just lucky to have it. That's why we didn't tell you. Because that's what the Burgum administration is getting involved with. And I'll give you one more example, because the Burgum administration is all in on Summit Carbon Solutions. They're all in, 100%. That they want this carbon injected into North Dakota soil. They want it stored right here in North Dakota. Now, we can debate whether or not that's a good thing or not. I'm going to get the Dakota Resource Council on. I'm going to let them be heard. I'm going to let the people that don't see this as a good thing for North Dakota's environment or future, they get to be heard too. But the point is, they didn't get to be heard in the beginning before they were out there trying to get easements to put the pipeline in. Now, take that one step further beyond the environmental side of it. Forget the whole debate over whether or not we should be injecting carbon into our soil here in North Dakota. Let's just take it down this road. If you're Summit Carbon Solutions and you're out there knocking on farmers' doors, you are at an advantage because you know that the governor's on your side, number one. Number two, you're dealing with every farmer one-on-one, and you're smart enough to know that each farmer is an independent business. We talk about farmers as though they're all one collective group. That's not how farming works. Each farm is an independent business, oftentimes competing against the other. They're a private business. So if I go knock on John Doe farmer's door and say, John, here's the agreement. Man, this is a good deal for you. And I change the language to include A, B, and C. And John doesn't have any clue over what Ted Doe 5 miles down the road got, or what role the state of North Dakota is going to play in the construction of this or the backing of this. He's at a disadvantage at his kitchen table. Now, here's what's really got me mad. Because for 14 years, I served in the North Dakota Senate. 14 years of going to meetings, advocating on behalf of farmers, working to get information out, being that conduit from the executive branch of North Dakota's government to the local individuals you get paid to work for. And all I see are legislators from my area popping into meetings, taking them in and leaving early. That's what I'm hearing from the farmers. Those legislators, and I'm going to say his name, I'm going to say Kathy Scraw's name. I'm going to say Jason Heitkamp's name. I'm going to say Sebastian Earl's name. Those are the people in my district. I don't know who they are in your district, but they owe it to you, their constituents, to facilitate a meeting with, forget about Summit Carbon Solutions. You know what they want. You know what they're trying to do. They need to bring the governor's office in. They need to bring James Lamont in. They need to hold a meeting in the Morton Community Hall or the Wyndmere Senior Center, or they need to hold a meeting in Milner, or pick a town. I don't care. They'll come. Farmers will come to the meeting, and they need to put the Lamonts of the world in front of this group as their conduit and say, there, James, tell them what the state of North Dakota's position is. Tell them how much Summit Carbon Solutions gets from you, what you've promised them, and what you haven't, so that these men and women know what they're signing and know what they're up against. And if these legislators aren't doing that for farmers, then they're not doing their job. And so far, they're not doing their job. Let's get to the weather cave and visit with Too Tall Tom. the East. We've got at the Sanctuary, we've got an open house there to listen to the Fargo mayoral debate. That's right. 6 of the 7 candidates are going to be there. The other one is, well, she's on vacation, or else she would be there. I think she's in Spain or leaving for Spain today. But she had said she would be there if she could. So, but 6 of the 7 are going to be there, and that'll be done all live right here in the East on KFGO from 6 o'clock till 8, commercial free. If you're in the area of the Sanctuary, come. If you're going to behave, stay. And we'd love to have you just take it in. Also, let you know the Cruiser is sponsored by the North Dakota Farmers Union, the North Dakota Association of Rural Electric Cooperatives, Pifers, Auction, Realty, and Land Management, Nilson Brand Law, and Broadband Association of North Dakota. Joel, you are right about lazy legislators, but they have an R after their name. And in North Dakota, lazy R's are acceptable. Good riding with you, folks.